And now for something completely machinima. Tracy Harwood. So I've done a little bit of digging around and I've discovered.
Ricky Grove. Fog comes in on little cat feet.
Phil Rice. This is the best film that I've seen all year and maybe ever.
Damien Valentine. Use the machinima, Luke.
Hello and welcome to And Now for Something Completely Machinima, the podcast about machinima, virtual production, and related technologies. I'm here with, my name is Phil Rice. I'm here with my co-hosts Tracy Harwood and
Hello.
Damien Valentine.
Hello.
Ricky is not here. He is stranded at the top of a baobab tree in Madagascar. Dang it. That was supposed to be smooth. Ricky has decided to take about a month off. And so thereby issuing a challenge to us, to me, to come up with, he's convinced that I can't come up with enough interesting reasons, fictional reasons to explain his absence. Let me just say, Ricky, challenge accepted, sir. Challenge accepted. So stay tuned for the next couple episodes on that. So, in this week's episode, we're talking about one of the machinima films that have been picked for this month. This week is my pick. And the film is called Battle of Badr, 624 AD, Rise of Islam. And it's by a YouTube channel that calls itself Bellum et Historia. I hope I pronounced that right. So this was... This film is very interesting to me because it struck me as it reminded me of. It's been a long time since I've had cable. I cut the cord quite a few years ago, but the History Channel was always one of my favorites because of the documentaries that they would do on there. And we've seen different filmmakers over the years do documentary style storytelling. I'm not going to be able to remember any of their names, but one of them I know was in iClone and was set during either the Greek or Roman Empire. Very, very well done. Something that impressed a lot of us. And this is in that vein. This is basically, and all the videos on this channel are of the same basic type. It's basically a portrayal of a battle from history. And with just narration commentary, it's got the animations of the representing the battle. It's got sound effects, and it's very nicely rendered. I'm not 100% sure. I'm checking now, but I believe that this is using a video game. Mm-hmm. Tracy will be able to. Tracy, you're going to be my chat GPT on that to extract that information. But here's the description of the video. The Battle of Badr, also referred to as the Day of the Criterion in the Quran and by Muslims, was fought on March 13th, 624 CE, near the present-day city of Badr al-Badida province in Saudi Arabia. This is basically a iconic battle from Islamic history. It's kind of considered one of the key moments in, is that movement going to survive or not, kind of thing. It's everything's on the line. They've been driven out of their home territory, and basically now this opposition army is coming to convinced that they're going to finish them off. They've got them on the run. They've got them down, and so it's a very intriguing underdog story. I love these types of battle stories from history, even though recognizing that many of them may just be the stuff of legend. But they happen so frequently that you got to think, okay, at least sometimes this was true. I mean, all the way back in the Old Testament and the Bible, there's stories where, the Israelites have a few hundred and they're against a few thousand, and somehow they prevail. And all throughout history, there's stories of things like this. Even to some degree, there's some battle stories in the American Revolution where Washington and his men are pinned down and they're freezing to death in the winter, and somehow they manage to prevail in a battle against vastly superior forces. I mean, the British Army at the time was the single biggest military power in the world, like bar none at the time. And somehow they prevailed in this battle. I like those stories; they're interesting. It taps into that underdog type of vein. And what, again, whether or not there's fantastic elements to it, or whether or not it's historically true, maybe isn't so relevant. It's just this is the way that these stories tend to get told, and very often it's attributed to, some divine intervention or a higher power that caused it to go that way, because how else do we account for that, Typically, battles go by the numbers. If you've got them outnumbered, unless there's some strange event related to terrain or weather or something, you're going to prevail, right? And so this is an instance where it went the other way. And I find it very interesting. And then also just, it's a really nicely rendered battle scene that looks very much like something like you would have seen in the old days on the History Channel. And they actually used tech similar to this in some of their documentaries, because obviously to restage big battle scenes like this with actors would just be, cost prohibitive.
You need Peter Jackson for that.
Yeah. Well, even with Peter Jackson in Lord of the Rings, they used a simulator for the big, assault on Minas Tirith, for example.
Yeah.
And that was, how long ago is that movie now? 25?
Yeah, I'm trying not to think
ago?
about how old those movies are.
Yeah, they were early 2000s, I believe. So
yeah.
Yes.
So about 25-year-old tech, and it looked quite good, by the way. And now this is someone with a video game, basically, with some mods, and it's very respectable quality. Are there little glitches like Machinima has? Yeah, maybe that's part of why this video intrigued me in particular, because there's something about those little imperfections in genuine, game-based machinima that's part of the charm for me, anyway. Because I'm not expecting it to be some, tit for tat, sword swipe for sword swipe, perfect execution, but as a representational model of what the narrator is talking about, works really well. His other videos are great too. This one just caught my eye for some reason, and it's we don't really cover films of this genre, and certainly I don't know that this particular subject matter, anything related to Islam, has ever really crossed our desk on the show. So I thought, well, let's give it a look. So anyway, that's my take on it. What did you guys think?
It's definitely a very interesting choice. It's unusual to have a sort of documentary like this on our show. So it's made with a game called Total War Atilla. Total War games there's a series of them, and they cover different eras of history. And they're strategy games where you pick up one of the factions of the time, and you're supposed to conquer the region of wherever it's set. And they're known for being, I don't know if they're 100% historically accurate, but they try and be as historically accurate as they can while still making it a fun game. And what they're really famous for are these battle sequences. You have the strategic layer where you move the bits around the map. But this is what people really play it for, is these battle moments where you get to control the huge armies. And I remember when the first one was released, it was set in sort of feudal Japan, and no one had ever made a game like that before. So it really stood out. So yeah, Attila is, I don't know where Attila is in the series. It's not a series I follow that closely, but this is heavily modded as well. There's a whole list of mods in the video description. But what this reminded me of, as soon as I recognized the game, there was a TV show here in the UK called Time Commanders. And I think Tracy probably knows about this as well. And the idea was they were using a specially modified version of Total War, and they'd have a team of contestants in front of this huge screen, and they would have to recreate a historical battle, and every week it'd be a different battle that they would play through. Um,
Wow.
but they
That
used
sounds
this,
so cool.
yeah. It was quite a long time ago, so they didn't use it. Didn't look as good as this because this is a much more recent game. But watching this and like the historical aspect of it, they had in the show they had historians saying, "Well, this is the battle, and they'd outline the factions involved in the battle, and they'd talk about what really happened, and they would compare what the players were doing and saying, well, how is this the same or different from what really happened in the battle?" And sometimes um, the results of the game would be different, vastly different from what really happened. So it was a fun show to watch, and this is reminded me of that. And I thought this was really well done. There are obviously limitations with the game, but the creator of this video has kind of worked around it. Like there's a moment where they're talking about how three people from each side moved away from their armies and had a sort of 3v3 sword fight. But you can't show it because the game's not capable of that. So
Hmm.
it moves to a map and you just see little icons and you can see the armies behind. So you
I
just got
thought
an
that was
idea of
really
what's happening.
tastefully done too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was a clever way to get around the limitations of the game. Because I don't think you can get down to individual units like that. You have your army, but it's like a clump of soldiers. They move together as one. You can't just say, I want this one to move forward and attack by himself. It doesn't work that way. Um, but yeah, I thought this was really well done. It's not a battle I know too much about. But then I look at the channel and I thought, there's a lot of other battles here. Could be an interesting thing to watch if you're interested in historical battles and seeing how they played out and learning more about them. But Phil, I think you're right that about the numbers. It's always the underdog that wins. But then it's not going to make an exciting story which we say, well, I had 10,000 men and I crushed the 50 defending one tiny little village. No one wants to hear that story. They want to make it sound like they're the ones that. So
Sure.
it's hard to know which ones are exaggeration, which ones really happened, because obviously whoever won is going to tell the story uh, in their favor. But
Yeah, you figure some of the details are probably documented somewhere, army sizes or whatever. They're kind of triangulated upon by historians, but there's always going to be a little bit of, I think, there's an advantage to telling the story like that. We didn't win this by might, we won it for some other reason, and
yeah,
yeah, and you got to figure in history for every battle that's anywhere near like this, where the side that had less resources prevailed, there's probably hundreds that don't even become footnotes in history, where just smaller armies are just completely wiped out by big ones, and they're not even important enough to even be remembered. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious in the sequence you're talking about, where they were describing the 1v1 or 3v3 battles. They show these icons with these faces on there. It's hard for me to imagine that there are any records whatsoever of what the faces of, the people from 624 looked like in Saudi Arabia. So do you think the pictures are AI generated? They kind of
No.
have that. You don't think they are?
No,
I
I would imagine they are well, looking at the sources that have been used here, it's Wikipedia and
Okay. So
Encyclopedia Britannica.
maybe they're paintings that
I
were
think
done
they're
at some point.
paintings,
Okay,
yeah.
to represent. All right.
they might also be hero characters in the game.
Oh
They're still
yeah.
they don't just operate by themselves. They still have a huge army around them, but there might be a little icon that they could have extracted to use for these videos, or maybe
Gotcha.
they're not even in battles, but they're still part of the strategic layer. And you say, well, I'm going to put this leader in charge of this army, so they get a little bonus when they go and attack, but they're not actually a visible unit.
Right. It's interesting too that when they show that lineup of the 3 versus 3 icons, they show the faces of the opponents, but in Islam, it's a very widely held belief that for anybody that is of iconic status, it's not a good idea to show their face to represent them via an image. That's considered basically it's a danger of an idolatry, so to speak. So for the three figures on the side of the Muslim army, they're all just represented by Arabic lettering, which I assume represents their name. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I there's a discussion to be had that we probably won't have on here about, the ins and outs of all that. But I respect the fact that the filmmaker, who I have no reason to think is of a particular background, ethnically or religiously, that he made the choice to portray this story in a way that wouldn't be offensive to the people who would be offended by that. I think that's a nice choice. There are other ways to handle that, and
It's very respectful about the two cultures that are fighting in this. I imagine that if you look at some of the other videos, the filmmaker is going to display a similar kind of sensitivity to whatever conflicts and factions are
the ones
involved.
that I've seen, there's definitely a neutrality present in the narration. This is a guy just telling a story of how it happened, not preaching a sermon of any kind, which I did again appreciate.
Yeah.
Shall I go through? I mean, my comments are really very similar to what you've already said, actually, but I'll go through them and you see what you think. There's a couple of other things I think I might have picked up on. I mean, from what I could read about this, certainly the battle for the survival of Islam, which is what this is about, was it's a very significant story in history, of course. The army that we're talking about here was considerably smaller, as I understand it, just 313 lightly armed fighters than the Quraysh tribe of Mecca, which comprised, as I understand it, 1,000 warriors equipped with cavalry and armor. So for sure, the advantage was not with the Muslim tribe at all. And as you said, the military achievement is really quite remarkable. As a consequence, I think, of the terrain and also control of water, which seemed to be two of the things that were picked up specifically in the way that this was told. And I kind of really like the way that all those details that would have been captured in historical accounts have been used in the way that this story was told as well. Looking at the channel, as you've both said, the channel is dedicated entirely to reenacting battles, clearly recounted in texts, or I would suggest other artistic media forms. So I think what you are seeing here is the film itself, the machinimas that are produced here. I think what they are doing is providing an opportunity to debate the scenarios, and also to think about what the processes and maneuvers were as they were taking place in a sort of a battle in play, if you like, way, rather than people pushing markers around a board or reenacting it in an actual battle field, which is virtually impossible to do these days. I guess what's interesting here is the accuracy that the creators tried to represent through the enactment. Like I said, I don't think there would ever be a scenario where this could ever be attempted to be reenacted in person, to test, say, the ground conditions of where it took place. So I'm guessing that the only way that you can do this kind of thing is through using these kinds of game technologies, which I think is a particularly interesting dimension to what we're seeing here. I guess, therefore, what I tried to do when I was reviewing or looking at this, I was thinking, well, what's the creative practice that's gone into making this? And as Damien says, from what I can understand of it, it's been made using these Total War game series, which was developed by Creative Assembly. the series itself uses this concept of total war, both as a thematic foundation for the gameplay, um, and as a mechanic for the gameplay. And it's a turn-based strategy that's used for things like empire management, as I understand it, and these kind of real-time tactics that are used for the battles. And that offers players this sort of chance to wage war on a massive scale across what they describe as history. That I think thematically, it also represents things like resource mobilization using campaign maps, which you've also commented on, through which these players can also manage everything from economies to armies to diplomacy to trade and infrastructure, and also this kind of tactical map through which they can kind of just command the troops and engage in kind of detailed combat. There's also things in it like civilian impact, which I think is particularly interesting. I've never actually, well, I'll rephrase that. We have come across games in this kind of series, if you like. Civilian impact is another thing they talk about. Public order systems, which simulate things like war fatigue and rebellion and unrest, and then ideology and different types of warfare and what have you. And as you sort of said, it includes this version called Shogun. It also includes in its series Warhammer, which I'd forgotten because that's a really complicated game that we've talked about in the past. And then, as you said, right. Attila is another one, and there's various others as well, which are really quite interesting. I was curious, given what we don't know so much about Warhammer. I was kind of curious then about where this narration has come from, because to me it's really very well done. As you said, it's kind of like the History Channel that we used to get. My assumption when I was listening to it was that must be part of one of the battles in the game, and perhaps it's been extracted or reenacted within the game and just sort of edited into a machinima short. However, whilst there's not a fully voiced narrative for every battle in the games, there are sort of introductions for some of these kind of historical battles, which kind of give background information on these kind of famous conflicts, and they explain what your faction's role is and what the goals are and what have you. Mm-hmm. But this is not going to be one of those introductions. And that's because, as far as I can tell, early Islamic history set in the 7th century Arabia is not part of the game world. And that said, as I understand it, the mechanics are relatively straightforward to adapt using representations of things like asymmetrical warfare and these terrain locations, such as the choke point that was mentioned, and also things like high ground and controlling water access. All of these things can be simulated. So too can things like the leadership and belief systems through which characters can be, or their roles can be portrayed. Plus, what you've got here is modding communities. And what's very apparent is that modding communities have played a very large part in creating things like an Islamic conversion mod. And I believe that those are based on titles like Rome or Medieval 2, which I think when you look at the list of mods used here in the description, I think although it's been used in the Attila game, they're probably mods that are drawn from another one of the earlier games, the maybe Rome or Medieval 2 series. All of that you can't be very sure about, though, because there's not very much on the channel about how this stuff's been created, right, or what has, what's been used, which I think that's a pity, because it makes it more of a mystery, and yeah, it's difficult then to sort of critique it and comment on it and then have a view of the creative process, which I think would be particularly valuable when you're looking at a type of work like this. I couldn't also find out very much about who is behind the channel, Bella Meta Historia or War and History, or who narrated the film. It's not very clear whether this is an individual or a team of folks, or whether, in fact, AI has been used in the narration process. If I had to guess, I'd say it's one person who's evidently, supporting himself through channel memberships, probably merchandise sales and ad revenue from the reach of what actually is a very popular channel. And from what I can see, much of the material sourced in this particular work has come from Wikipedia and as I said earlier, Encyclopedia Britannica, which I'd suggest puts this into a slightly older person's field of reference. And I'd guess if I have to sort of mention a certain age, to own a set of the encyclopedia, you're probably looking at somebody maybe in their 70s now, producing something like this. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing. Um, yeah, so I think the only other thing I would say is that this channel is just so popular with the kind of work that it's done. It's got over 125 million views of its content. But given the sources that it's used, and given that much of the views that the channel has generated are from things like Lord of the Rings battle scenes, I would suggest that you want to be careful about the accuracy of the content that you're actually seeing, if indeed you want to look at this as a History Channel replacement. Because I would bet that, since those works were published, and we all know how weak Wikipedia is these days, I think, there'd be better sources that you could use, much like, the content that we looked at from the Roman point of view. That guy was a historian. The work that he was drawing on wasn't Wikipedia. It was scholarly texts. He was a proper researcher interested in historical accounts and facts and what have you, drawn from research and museum and gallery content. And I would suggest you got to go into it at that level of detail if you're going to do something with any kind of accuracy. Maybe the mods are, I don't know, maybe I'm not giving the mods enough credit for the accuracy and, say, the way characters are portrayed and what have you. But I would certainly be a little cautious about that. And then the only other thing I would say is, for those that are interested in the series of shorts that have been created by this guy on this particular topic, the rise of Islam, there is a whole playlist of historical battles which are, equally well treated as this one is. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing to have a chance to talk about. Didn't realize it was as popular in terms of, battle reenactments and showcasing those on YouTube, as this clearly evidently shows. So yeah, it was really interesting to talk about it. Thank you.
However many years ago it's been now, when basically the Wiley, I can't remember the name of the publisher, but they approached me to and wanted me to write a Machinima for Dummies book. And my son had just been born, and I just didn't feel like I could commit to it. So I referred her to Hugh. So there's nobody better to do this. And he ended up pairing up with Johnny to handle the writing of that. And then they had the publisher hire me as a technical editor, which basically means that they would write the book and then I would go through and test stuff and make sure that what they were saying, that the instructions all worked. And I remember thinking, when it came to a certain point in the book, because they devoted a series of chapters into creating a machinima with a Total War game. And I remember thinking they were crazy. Because it's like, this is not what people think about, of course. And I'm the Quake guy, so I'm thinking, that there's so many other choices. Why this? Seeing this, it's like this is what they had in mind.
Mm.
Clearly,
Mhm.
and Hugh was a big fan of
Yeah, he was.
a big student of battle reenactment
Mm.
and role playing on that scale and things
Mm.
like that. So, yeah, I'm sure that this type of usage is exactly what he was envisioning
Mm.
and wanted more people to consider and use. So it was neat. All these many years later, I know that people have been doing this for, on other channels, but to see it done really well and to see it gaining so many eyes is makes me a little bit the very valid concerns you bring up about accuracy of certain information and whatnot being
Mm.
at best questionable, right? That we don't really know, except for the paltry sources that he cited, which are, not scholarly particularly. So, but that notwithstanding, the fact that there's this much interest in history is encouraging to me
Mm.
about the planet,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I thought of. I think that's part of what attracted me to this film as a pick, was remembering back then how wrong I was about their selection of Total War, and really they were ahead of their time. So anyway, thanks for your comments on this. I think it was a
A small aside, Phil, the
yeah,
book was launched at the first European Machinima Festival that I directed.
2007.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that
Wow.
makes sense because I took a
Mm.
break from machinima starting in about the year 2000 and was away for about 5 years. And when I came back, all gung ho to continue making stuff in Quake 2 like an idiot, the whole world had moved on except for Leo. Leo, Lucy, and Bay was like, "Oh, you're back." Yeah, we both fortunately had smarter ideas about how to proceed. So I ended up getting into The Sims, and that's when Mail Rester Medikit started to evolve, and that it was around that time period. And my son had just been born, and so I was juggling a lot, and even back then, still couldn't figure out how to make my love to want to make stuff with machinima fit into my life. It was tough. I stuck to it for a few years, but just couldn't sustain it. And it's not like now. So
Yeah,
having them grow up and get out of the house will do that to you, apparently. So
absolutely. I think
yeah. Anyway,
the thing I was going to say, the only thing I would add to this is if you're going to make films like this, you must be more forthcoming with your approach to doing it and the tools that you've used and the game engine that you've used. Because these are things that we really, people will want to see. How have you
yeah.
done it?
Do you think there's a wide audience for that, or is that just us?
No,
We look at it from this is our niche. It's what we
well,
think about. But does general audience really want to know that info?
well, I would
I'm
have
not saying
said,
it with skepticism. I'm genuinely curious.
I would have said if he's using game assets, then he should at least be giving credit to the game, and he's not. He's unless he's created it in something like Blender or you know, I don't know, Premiere Pro or something. He might have. It might not be a machinima at all. It might just be something else.
No, I'm
But
pretty sure it's using the game.
I
yeah,
suspect it is the game.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm
It
certain it's the
gets a
game too, but he's not
it does get
crediting
a
it.
very brief mention in the description, so I looked it up.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's the mod Scourge of the Desert Reskin Overhaul, and it took me to the Steam Workshop page for that mod, and it says it's for Total War Atilla.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah, but he never actually mentions the game in the description, does he? That's
No.
that's why when I went to look at it, I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not really sure what game this is. I didn't do a simple Google search like
Yeah.
you did.
I
I'm
just
thorough.
a list of mods, but not the actual game. So I just
Right.
Googled the first mods, and that's
That
what I
could
found.
just be an omission by like accident. Like it's not an intent. It could be that it's not an intentional omission.
Yeah.
So, sometimes when you get wrapped up in the world surrounding a game, you make some assumptions about what your audience knows. but he's clearly appealing to an audience that's much, much bigger than the game players of the Total War series. I mean, 125 million views. Good Lord.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it would be nicer for that to be a little bit more clear cut.
but he's also, when you look at the merchandise and what have you, he's drawing on assets from the games.
Mm.
And I'd say he's on slightly tricky ground there, maybe. Maybe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I
Yeah.
didn't even look at the merch page until just now.
But I would just encourage more openness on this sort of thing. Definitely.
I once made a video. It's for a friend's roleplay website that every year makes some videos for the anniversary. And we decided to do a big epics battle. And I made it with Movie Storm. And this would have been so much easier.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
I pulled it off. It looks great.
That must have been quite challenging.
Yeah, you could say that. Especially since there were no sword fighting animations.
Anyway.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. If you have any feedback for us, feel free to leave it as a comment on this video or wherever it is you're listening to this. Or you can reach us by email, talk@completelymachinima.com. Tracy informs me that we've only got about 900,000 unread emails, but we'll be sorting through those this week. And we do tend to receive your feedback. We're not entirely sure how, because there really is a lot of unread email, and yet we are getting your feedback when you send it. So feel free to send it in. talk@completelymachinima.com. I'm Phil Rice, and on behalf of my co-hosts, Damien Valentine, Tracy Harwood, and Ricky from Madagascar, we'll see you next time.
Bye.